Welcome to the Coffee with Karen podcast, a weekly chat show discussing everything from holistic health to current affairs from a mental, physical and spiritual perspective. Get your weekly cup of positivity with a sprinkling of woo-woo.
I get a lot of Malachys and occasionally a Malachy.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yeah, we can, but easily solved. So
Exactly.
Awesome. So we're there. Right. So welcome to a Coffee with Karen, a cup of positivity with just a sprinkling of woo-woo. So this show every week, I have guests talking about whatever topic they want to talk about, but from either a mental, a physical, or a spiritual perspective. That's our sprinkling of woo-woo. Now, your host today, my name's Karen Roberts, and I suppose with my own business, I do combine the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. So if anybody wants to get in touch, go to KarenRobertsCoaching.com. But today, my guest, Malachy, is going to be speaking really more from the spiritual perspective. So there is going to be a little bit of woo-woo. So the power of pattern interrupt. Well, I'm actually going to allow Malachy to explain a little bit about that. So Malachy, if you could explain to the listeners a little bit of who you are, what you do, and share a little bit of your story, please.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me on the show. First of all, Karen, I'm delighted to be here. And the title and your tagline, health, physical, spiritual, mental, psychological, all combined together kind of jumped out at me. And, with a little bit of woo-woo, that's okay. I definitely kind of tick those boxes. I suppose I'm coming from a background of having a degree in health and exercise science and also circus themed entertainment and circus skills performance. So quite a background in personal performance and working and challenging yourself to perform at a high level in sometimes high stress environments. And health-related fitness. That was where I started out with things. But I suppose in terms of a pattern interrupt, we've seen a massive one over the last year and near year and a half really now, where a pattern interrupt simply is something that stops you in your tracks, interrupts your normal pattern, your day-to-day habits, because we go through most of our lives on autopilot. About 80 or 90% of what we do is just completely habit and autopilot driven. So a pattern interrupt is anything that just literally stops you in your tracks and makes you go, stop. And in social media, we see this in ads that are kind of strange or weird or quirky, something that stops you from scrolling. And that's what marketers and advertisers are looking for with their in-feed ads, is something that will stop you from scrolling. Well, for me, in my own life, something that was a very big pattern interrupt was an otter appearing in front of me when I was about to do something stupid. And very drastic. And I was about to end my own life, literally. And I was at the water's edge. My pockets were filled with stones. And I don't mean that in any metaphorical sense. I mean, I was literally had filled the pockets of my cargo pants with stones, and I was about to go for a walk in the Atlantic. And I wasn't in a good place. I really wasn't. And that otter for me represented a pattern interrupt, because it was, otters are generally kind of shy, quiet, nocturnal, not quite solitary, but almost solitary. Apart from their own immediate kind of familial unit, they're generally solitary. It's very rare normally that you would see them.
Right. And in the sea, did you say this was the sea, not a river?
In the sea, yeah. Right at where I live is pretty close to the shore of the Atlantic Ocean. It's a little town called Tralee in County Kerry in southwest corner of Ireland. And that spot would have been about 4 maybe 5 kilometers away from where I lived. And I had walked to that point with the intention to end my life. So it wasn't exactly a spur of the moment thing. I'd just done a 5K walk, so it took me about an hour to get there. So
Wow.
I would have had, in that time, I would have had time to change my mind, and I hadn't. But it was this otter appearing up in front of me that was a pattern interrupt.
Wow.
My thought process that led me to that, I'm sorry if it's a bit deep, was I remember thinking as on the standing on the bank of the sea, and I was thinking, no one will miss me when I'm gone, or who would even miss me, and there was nobody coming to mind. What difference will it make if I'm gone? And the only thing I could think of was, well, somebody will notice when I don't show up for work tomorrow, but I'll be replaced in a couple of days. I was down in a hole. I had, my reserves were exhausted. I'd had enough, and I couldn't see any way of things improving.
Right, which is happening so much. Oh my goodness, so much over this past year, right?
Yep. And it was the isolation. I think currently it's the isolation for so many people, and the lack of contact. At that time, though, I felt like I was the loneliest creature on the planet. I felt that I was so alone. And this was the one thing. It was an overwhelming sense of loneliness and isolation. And then this otter pops up in front of me, and as if to say, look, you're not alone. You'd say you're solitary, you say you're alone. Look at me, I'm solitary, I'm alone, and yet I'm here for you.
Wow.
And the reason the otter for me was significant was, as a teenager, and even as a youngster, we lived in the centre of Ireland. My family had a farm. There was a river running by some of the fields, and there was a spot in one corner where there was just I suppose, almost like an inflow where the river would flow in, and it formed a little alcove. And it was just a really nice camp spot. It was a good spot for swimming for me in the summer, because it was not actually out in the river. It was safe. And I remember I was fascinated by otters and by wildlife as a kid, and used to watch the nature programs on TV, and had some of the books by the various naturalists that were living in Ireland. And I had a fascination with otters, and I would see the tracks on the bank, and I would see their markings and their droppings, but I never saw an otter.
Huh.
And for years, I would go down the land at night while my parents were asleep, while the rest of the world was asleep, when otters should have been out and about. And I would creep down quietly, as quiet as I could be, as a youngster and as a teenager. And I searched for years to try and find one of these otters, and never did. Knew they were there. There was obvious markings, paw prints, the whole lot. Could never find one.
Until the one time, which was the most important time.
Yes.
Wow.
Then that solitary creature was there for me when I needed it. So you could call that spirituality. You could call it woo-woo. You could call it a lucky happenstance, coincidence, serendipity.
Whatever you want to call it, it's definitely a little bit of woo-woo. So for a lot of people, this last year has caused a lot of people to have those kinds of feelings. So for you, when did this actually occur?
This was actually about 20 years ago, maybe 24 years ago, I guess. And I was working, had a steady job, no real career advancements in it as such. It was working in a hotel bar and nightclub bar. I'd kind of risen as far as it was possible. I was running one of three bars in the nightclub, and was senior staff in the hotel, but there wouldn't really have been much in the way of advancement opportunity there. Really enjoyed the work. I'm very much a people person. So I got to see definitely lots of people between the nightclub work, the hotel bar work, and function work. And you'd see people at their best and at their worst. So, you know, the old saying, in vino veritas, in wine the truth. There's a certain element of truth in that. When people have a few drinks, the inhibitions are gone and you see where they're really at on the day.
Yes.
But also at that time was in kind of an on again, off again relationship. And I find I don't do well with uncertainty. I suppose like most people, I like to have a certain amount of stability and know where I stand in, particularly in relationships. Nothing worse than trying to figure out or guess where you're at. And that relationship ended not by my choice. And I suppose a combination of the bar work lifestyle, would have been drinking a lot during that time. They do say the person in any given bar most likely to become an alcoholic is the person behind the counter. And I suppose that, I probably wouldn't have been too far off. I would have been, you could call it a party animal, or you could call it a functioning alcoholic. I don't know that in my case, there mightn't have been too much difference between the two. But at that stage, I was done. Once that relationship had been on again, off again, on again, off again. And eventually I had no more reserves left. I was done. And I suppose that was the stimulus for things that had been building up for a while. I suppose I've been getting worn down. My nervous system, my immune system, my resilience, being worn down through the alcohol being a depressant and it being literally an everyday part of my life. That would have been the relationship breaking up again would have been the stimulus that just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, tipped me.
Yeah, sure. Well, all these emotional triggers and that, you can see that, you know, for a lot of people, they could have deal with maybe one, or somebody could deal with two, but then it's just these layers upon layers upon layers.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I suppose for me, older and wiser now, I actually lost my dad when I was 7 years old to a massive heart attack. So there's no warning. Literally went to bed one night and woke up the next day and my dad was gone. And that's something that in Ireland in those days, there wasn't counselling available. Or if it was, you didn't even know it existed. You know, this is pre-internet. So that was something I had never dealt with. And I suppose that may have been a factor in terms of why I was so drawn to inebriation and seeking altered states. And it is something that during COVID, I did start to suffer from anxiety and once I realized what was going on, brain fog and high heart rate, I reached out to a counsellor pretty much immediately and have been getting counselling for 4 or 5 months.
Interesting. So that actually helped you, that enabled you to recognize the factors, because I'm sure, and you're not alone there, right? And it's interesting you said, because last week's guest, we were talking about extroverts versus introverts. And it's interesting you say that you are a people person, so you're an extrovert. Lockdown, and I would class myself as an extrovert, and lockdown has really had a huge effect on us. So for the introverts, they've actually been in their happy place. They're quite happy to be at home on their own, doing not very much. But for people like me or you, we're like, oh my God, we need that social interaction. We need to be out with lots of people. And we have definitely seen, it's interesting that you said that earlier, because of literally last week's conversation on here has, just made that, well, it's helped me understand that a little bit more, as to why people like us have actually, you know, because I would have said, I don't get depression. I don't suffer with this. I don't suffer with that. But oh my goodness, this whole last year, I have really, really struggled with it. And yes, you know, you are not alone. But it's so interesting that you pointed that out earlier and not knowing. So let's go back. So you had that pattern interrupt back then. So you had said that you'd had this hour's walk, so you had plenty of time to think it through, and nothing had changed your mind till that point. So what was it about this pattern interrupt that switched it around for you?
It was the fact that, you know, if it had been a fish that jumped out, that would have been irrelevant. If it had been a swan, lovely, elegant creatures that they are, it still would have been irrelevant. I probably wouldn't even have noticed. But it was the personal significance for me of the otter, a creature that I had searched for years and never found. So it was like my golden goose isn't quite the word I'm looking for, but, you know, something I've been searching for years. And it was only when I was in my darkest hour, about to be my final hour, and that was when I found the creature I had been searching for.
Right.
And as having told that story to a couple of people, friends who are also coaches, and they brought my attention to the fact that in a lot of cultures and mythologies, the otter symbolizes playfulness, joy, kind of energetic enthusiasm, lightheartedness, and all of those are traits that I tend to have in abundance. You know, I teach circus skills. I perform all over the country, or well, pre-COVID did, and slowly but surely that's starting to come back now as we get our, you know, the vaccinations get rolled out and things slowly come back to some semblance of normality. So that, you know, that joyfulness, that childish or childlike, I should say, bit of a subtle but important difference. That childlike playfulness is something that's very, very central to who I am as a person.
Right.
Even in my health and fitness work with my clients, a lot of the time the reason people don't follow through with the health and fitness program is because it gets boring. And particularly so if they're rehabilitating from an injury or from surgery, or with older adults on a falls prevention program. A lot of the exercises there for working balance, you go to, you know, particularly coming from a clinical setting, yes, they will be very good and effective, but most of the time they're done as, well, you have to do this and therefore you're going to do it because it's good for you. And we all know we don't always do things just because they're good for us, and particularly if we find them boring.
Absolutely.
So I always try to bring a large component of playfulness or personal challenge in with any exercise that I think a client is going to find boring. And I'll be able to tell relatively quickly, even before we ever start, if, you know, they find this, for example, a typical balance exercise, single leg balance with one knee lifted up. So you're standing there and the goal is to hold for 30 seconds. And you should be doing that every day, 3 times on each leg. If you've ever done that, that is as boring as sin.
It's amazing how long 30 seconds is when you're just holding it. It seems to go on forever. So yes,
absolutely.
I would agree. For a lot of people, that's going to be, when it's boring, we don't really want to do it, do we? Oh, nope. What have you got there?
This is a juggling ball, but, you know, a tennis ball, or you could have a highlighter or a biro, a pen, anything. You've got to stand there and hold your leg up off the floor. Let's make it more interesting. You could stand next to the counter or next to a chair and see if you can put the ball underneath your knee. So it's going around and around underneath the knee. And instantly, you forget about how long you're doing this for.
Distraction.
Distraction. And to build on that, you can start counting in your second language. How many times can you do it? Or saying the alphabet and things like that.
Yeah.
They distract the brain, so you're not getting bored. And also, they're challenging your balance just a little bit more because the arms and the body are moving. You have that movement there, and that allows you to be mobile and playful in your balance.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, that would make sense that actually it would be better for you because your proprioception, if you're just focusing on balancing, you're actually having to retrain those messages that are going up your leg to your brain to tell your brain exactly where your foot is because you're thinking about something else. So actually, it's probably another level up, isn't it? So, in fact, initially, people may not actually be able to do the two things, actually try to balance and be distracted by something else. So it's actually retraining their balance, their proprioception in a higher level. And yes, like you say, they've got something to aim for, some extra challenge to go for, because it's the most, I know for my clients, like just trying to get them to stretch, we know that stretching, you need to stretch for a lot longer. But that we don't do it because of exactly what you've just said, boredom.
Exactly.
So actually what you've just said there is also, that links back really to your story, doesn't it? That's a pattern interrupt.
Correct. Yeah, it's all about the pattern interrupt. Anytime you're trying to change something, a pattern interrupt, and the whole damn global pandemic thing has been a pattern interrupt for literally everybody.
But not a good one.
Sometimes, I mean, now, okay, let's just lay it out straight. The entire world has been living in a state of generalized anxiety for the last 16 months. Literally everybody. People who have never suffered from anxiety, never had any mental health worries at all. Everybody across the board has been hit with generalized anxiety. Over the next 12 months, we are going to see a massive increase in demand for counselors, therapists, and people of that background. Without any doubt. Even talking to some of my own friends who would never even have remotely considered the notion of a counselor or a therapist before are, and guys my own age and, in their early 40s, strong men who would be men's men. And they're now being, the moment they hear that somebody they know, or one of their peers is getting counseling, the doors open and suddenly this becomes a conversation they're willing to have.
And that's exactly really why you're here today, because, some people think, oh, it's not really positive, your talks. Actually, it is, because we've got to have the conversation, because this is the thing, it's hidden, it's not talked about. And you're right, so many, and I am finding it fascinating and I'd really like to see stats on this, because it does appear that this whole situation has affected men more so than women. And the only reason I say that is I picked up a lady who works in a mental health part of a hospital. I won't say which hospital. But I was just sort of chatting to her and, how are things, have you seen a really bad increase in, since all this mess started? And she said, it's crazy. She said, so speaking to her on that day, in the previous 4 days, there had been 3 major incidents, and I won't explain what had happened, but major incidents with men, all in about their 50s, early 50s, all of them, no history of mental health issues, all of them quite a high-powered job. One was a hedge fund guy, one was, I don't know, that kind of thing, sort of city boy. They all had quite high-powered job. I didn't know whether they were living alone, whether they had, didn't know any of that.
Okay.
But it's just very interesting that out of any of the people that I also know this past year, very sadly, the suicides have been men.
Yeah.
And maybe it is because we are not having the conversation. So in some way they're feeling like they're not good enough or whatever because of what's happened. But actually, no, they are. This is just a situation that we've all found ourselves in.
Yeah.
And that there is help. We do need to just talk about it. Or like for you, have a pattern interrupt, right?
Yeah. And that pattern interrupt is, well, it took the legs out from under me. I had, gone down towards the water edge to find a big rock to carry, as well as having my pockets filled with stones. I was, and what is curious, the things that go through your head, I was thinking, I wonder how far I'll get before I drop the stone. I wonder how far I'll get before the phone in my pocket stops working. And then the otter popped up and literally dropped me on my arse on the rocks. I had a sore backside for about a week after. But just literally floored me that this otter should pop up. And I don't mean it's like way out in the bay. I mean, literally just beyond arm's reach. I could almost
Wow.
touch this otter, having searched for years to find one without success.
Wow.
But that otter was a pattern interrupt that got me out of my, I'm all alone, I'm the loneliest creature on the planet, no one will miss me if I'm gone. And this otter just popped up in front of me and looked straight at me and continued to stare straight at me. And just stayed there. And this was going on for what seemed like hours. It was probably closer to about 10 or 15 minutes. But even so, that's an inordinate amount of time for a random wild animal to pop up and stare at you, and then stayed there until my thought process was completely scrambled. And I realized I would be missed. And I emptied the stones out of my pockets and took the phone out, started walking home. And it was about 5 a.m. and I made a phone call and talked. And the tears were streaming down my face as I was talking. I remember walking back in along, and I was literally, everything that had troubled me for years was coming out. It was literally like the floodgates had opened.
There you go. Incredible. What an incredible experience. And so from that point, how has that affected? So what effect did that have on you moving forward?
I suppose I realized that no matter how bad things got, take the phone out. We all have them. And even if you have no credit, there's still 999 or 112, depending on where you are. There's always someone at the end of the phone, no matter how bad things get. And for me, it made me realize that pattern interrupt made me realize that no matter how bad things are now, in a moment, now is gone and there's an opportunity for better. Now is gone. Now, by the time you've thought about now, it no longer exists and you're on to another moment. And every single moment is an opportunity for an improvement. When you reach rock bottom, the only way is up. I mean, I'm starting to sound completely cliched now, but when you're reached that absolute low point, the only way is up. And there's, it's so frightening to me that I was going to take a permanent bad decision over something that really was temporary.
Yeah, temporary feeling. And that is it, I suppose, for so many people, everything can seem so static and so solid, and things are never going to change. And, you say about cliches, but, all these sayings, they are so true, whether they're cliche or not. It's irrelevant because the truth is the truth. So all these things, this too shall pass, because it does. Nothing stays this. I know it may feel like the last year nothing's changed, but it does, right? None of it stays exactly the same. So, and that goes for good and for the bad.
Exactly.
So, we are just living our whole lives in this constant fluctuating up and down, up and down. And yeah, we've got to learn to ride the wave rather than stay down. When we are down, we stay down. And at the end of the day, it's all stories.
Yes.
When we realize it's all stories that we create in our head, because none of it's actually real. I mean, like for you went through this whole thought process, I'm not going to be missed. Right, you now know that wasn't true. That wasn't a truth. You would have been sorely missed.
My family would have been utterly devastated. My friends would have been utterly devastated. I mean, it would have left a trail of pain and destruction behind, or I would have left a trail of pain and destruction behind me if I had followed through. And I had fully intended to follow through until the pattern interrupt.
There you go. It's fascinating how anybody can get ourselves into that just feeling so static and no moving, and it is all only temporary.
Yeah, it's interesting. Something I said kind of quite early in COVID, even before anxiety or anything happened, it was that the whole shutdown of the entire world, more or less, was a pattern interrupt. And potentially a good one. Pattern interrupt by itself isn't necessarily either good or bad. It's just a pattern interrupt. It's a stop and think, and that's what it is. It's a stop mindlessly scrolling on social media, or stop mindlessly drifting through your life on autopilot. Pattern interrupt is an opportunity to stop and think: is what I'm doing now, is this course of action serving me well, or is it likely to be harmful and counterproductive? Very acutely there on the water's edge, the course of action I was about to take would have been incredibly harmful, both for me and for my little bubble of the world. COVID has caused many people to stop and look at their lives and their courses of action, their choices. And a lot of people have started to make healthier choices. Having the time, spending more time at home. Half the world learned how to cook sourdough bread. I don't know, maybe that was just an Irish thing, but over here it was huge. The first few months of lockdown was, sourdough bread. You go on social media and people are looking for starters for sourdough bread. But part of it was a novelty factor, trying to alleviate the boredom, trying to find something new to do. But part of it was they had a pattern interrupt and recognize that you can do things differently in some way, shape, or form. Can there be a better way of doing things? A lot of people now are going to be mixing working from home with working in the office, kind of 2 to 3 days a week of each, where previously working from home wouldn't have been entertained by their employer. But suddenly employers are realizing we don't necessarily need to have people in the office. If people enjoy their work, they will do the work well. You don't have to stand over them like a slave driver cracking a damn whip.
Yeah, I mean, that does depend. I think that depends on the company. So there are some. You're absolutely right. The ones that have recognised that, you're right, trust. Trust the people to do the work. You don't need to be monitoring every second. Were there any keystrokes on the computer, or where were they? What they're doing? Just go by the end result. Did they get the work done? Yes or no? Whereas, unfortunately, the ones that are coming from a place of fear of work not getting done are trying to control everything and monitor, you're a bit too long going for a cup of coffee or whatever, which is a shame, isn't it? So I would agree. I hope that this pattern interrupt has caused, like you say, for many, the ones that have been furloughed, so for them, really, there's been no hardship necessarily if they were getting 80% of their full pay and at home. I think for them, they've been in a great position because they have been allowed to look at their lives. Is this what I really want? And in that meantime, they might have even retrained in something that they would be more passionate about.
Yeah.
So that is definitely a plus. And like you say, the others that maybe realise they don't have to commute miles to and from work every day, and hopefully their employers will realise that to get the best out of them, because we realise when we get the best out of people, we've got to treat them with respect, treat them, you know, just, you know, if they're going to get the job, just leave them alone, you know, leave them be. You don't have to be sat at your desk for X amount of hours, just get it done. So yes, I do think there's a lot of positives to come out of this pattern interrupt. However, there are still people like you and me that are more extrovert, and they may not have been in that financially good position. Some have really struggled. So for you, knowing what you know on a personal level, because you've been through it and survived it, what would you say to anybody who is maybe out there that hasn't had that cushion for them and are maybe feeling like they're struggling and that there is no way out? What would you say to them?
I think, based on my own experience, you know, there's so many things you can do in terms of helping to alleviate anxiety, depression, the whole gamut of, shall we say, the downward spiral of mental health. You know, you talk about getting regular exercise, eating a balanced diet, meditating, things like that. I was doing all those things. I'm a health and fitness professional. I teach classes a few times a week. I meditate not as often as I try to, but I do meditate a couple of times a week, or at least I'll spend 5 minutes focused on my breathing, just counting the breaths, counting the length of time in and out. Regular exercise, healthy balanced diet, you know, good variety of fruit and veg, and getting the different colors of vegetables in, so getting a broad spectrum of nutrients. And I was still suffering with anxiety. So it's possible that you can still be doing all the right things and not feel 100%, and that's okay. That's not on you. That's just where we find ourselves in the world.
Yeah, sure. Like you say, it's not.
Reach out.
It's okay, and that is the thing. It's okay to feel like crap one day. Excuse my French, but do you know what? That is part of life as well. Like sometimes I think there's also could be potentially so much pressure on us to be feeling, everything's great, everything's wonderful. And no, we don't always feel like that. So actually, sometimes the more we resist against it, the more we're actually attracting it more to us. So you say about you covered the mental side, a lot of the physical sides, the right nutrition, right exercise. Yeah, maybe everybody needs a little bit of woo-woo in their lives, right?
I think so. And in terms of woo-woo, now this is going to be coming really out from left field. But I think, Karen, you're going to be okay with this one. So on the circus background, the old magician's phrase, abracadabra, that actually has really ancient origins. And there's a little bit of debate about the exact origin of this word or expression. It's tied down between coming from ancient Sumerian and ancient Hebrew. And on both sides, it roughly translates as, by my words, so I create, or my words make real.
Love it.
So you take that and you take it back to yourself. What words are you using to describe yourself? And most of us will have a tendency to describe ourselves more harshly, or to speak to ourselves more harshly than we would to our friends.
100%.
So a little pattern interrupt for you is when you find yourself speaking very harshly to yourself, or thinking very harshly at yourself, Would you say that to a friend? And how long do you think they would remain your friend if you spoke to them like that on a regular basis?
There you go.
Because I know from talking to my clients, some of the mental scripts we have, if our friends were to say those things to us on a regular basis, we would drop them like a bag of crap.
Absolutely.
To use some French myself here. We're so harsh to ourselves so often. And particularly as if the more often you're harsh to yourself, the more of a habit it becomes. The more often you repeat that phrase, the more real it becomes. And this thing even has a background in neuroscience. In neuroscience, they say neurons that fire together wire together. So when you reach a decision or a judgment, the synapses, the pathways in the brain that decision has triggered along the way, the more often you reach that decision, or the more often you go through that thought process, those neurons get a little bit thicker, a little bit stronger. The signal can pass faster until eventually you get from point A to point B. Where are we? Yeah, from point A to point B, lickety split. Whereas at the start, you kind of thought about for a few seconds, like, oh well, I'm crap at this, because you tried it and you didn't do well. If you're trying anything new, congratulations. Be crap.
Yeah.
Give yourself the freedom to be crap. We all suck at stuff when we're beginners.
Exactly.
The more often you try something, the better you get at it. Goes for both saying positive things about yourself and saying negative things. So if you're saying constantly, oh, I'm crap, or I can't, your brain is listening, your body is listening, and you're changing your physiology by repeating that.
Yeah,
so,
and guess what?
Pattern interrupt.
There you go. That's what you need even in that time. So yeah, you're so right. We all, again, you know, okay, maybe some of us don't, but it tends to have this habitual pattern, or we have been conditioned somehow.
Yep.
To speak negatively to ourselves, because I suppose also we've been brought up to believe that, you know, speaking good about ourselves, that's not very humble, and that's not, you know, that's showing off, or that's, so we actually have been taught throughout our lives from children to actually not do the positive aspect, because that's being cocky, or that's being, you know, so then we get more conditioned to do the negative side of it, which does have a knock-on effect. And I've spoken to, you know, people who are adults now who really, you know, suffer with their mental health. And my thought process is, but you weren't always like that. So that means, you know, that's not you. That's a habit that you've just found yourself reacting in that certain way, just like you say, because they've done it over and over and over again, but that's not who they are. You know, babies are born perfect.
Exactly. And a baby trying to learn to walk is going to try and fail hundreds of times. They're going to fall on his face. There will be tears, absolutely,
doesn't
along
stop
the way.
Them.
Nope. They learn, they see other people doing it, and they go, I can do it. They can do it. Therefore, there's a good chance I can do it as well. So
quite often it is going back to even like the stories that we tell ourselves, it's all coming from us.
Yep.
It's all coming from us. But also that's so empowering, because we actually don't need anybody else to solve the problem for us, because it's within.
Yep. And that little voice sometimes that you hear as well, that can be holding you back. And you might think, well, you know, this is, it's kind of, it's keeping me safe, or it's keeping me within my limits. One of my running clients a while back, lady in her early 50s. And just the topic of kind of the voice in your head that holds you back was kind of our theme as we were running along. And I asked each of the members of my group, the voice in your head that says you can't go any faster, or you can't go any farther, or you need to slow down and take a rest while you're running, whose voice is that? What does it sound like? Because for me, I know that voice is very strict and stern and authoritative. And I can't associate it with anybody except it's not my voice, but it's coming from me. I don't know if that even makes sense. Maybe a little bit of woo. But this particular client told me that her voice in her head that tells her to slow down, or she can't run that fast, or she can't run any faster, or she can't run for any longer. This lady in her mid-50s, that voice was her secondary school gym teacher. And 40 years later, that voice, and even though the gym teacher actually, she'd said, was very nice to them and very encouraging, very positive, the association was there that when it came to physical things, this was the voice that was telling her that she couldn't do it.
Isn't it funny that we hold on to so much from when we're children? It's like, no, but we're an adult now.
Yep.
I'm not going to if only we could just have a little word with ourselves. Like, come on. That was then, this is now. But so many of us carry so many of these patterns from very young ages.
Absolutely.
And we're bringing them into the now. And because until I suppose we do have the conversation, because a lot of this is habitual and we haven't had the conversation. So there's no need to change things because it's habitual, because we haven't been made aware until you actually bring it in front of you and realize that that's me reacting to that thing, whatever it is, as a 7-year-old. Yeah, but hang on, I'm 49 years old now, so I would react differently. It's so fascinating you're right, how we talk to ourselves has a huge, because that's actually, of course it's more powerful because it's coming from us. It's our voice.
Yep. I've taken the tack when I catch myself with that negative voice, particularly. It works. I'm very kinesthetic, being in health and fitness and being in circus, very bodily based. So I suppose in terms of learning things, when I do things with my hands, I learn so much better than reading, writing, or screen or hearing. But in terms of breaking that pattern, so my pattern interrupt for the physical stuff, or the voice that says you can't, or slow down, or you've gone far enough now, take a little break. Mickey Mouse after sucking on a helium balloon. Get that voice in your head, and that's now your inner critic. So anytime that inner critic kicks off, Mickey Mouse sucking on a helium balloon, totally cuts the legs out from underneath that authoritative voice.
Right.
I put this into practice a few times to break that habit. I was out for a run one day along by a riverbank, and there's a nice river walk here in Tralee. And there was an older couple coming towards me. Look, very cute. They were probably in their early 70s, walking arm in arm. Really lovely. And I was struggling on my run, and I was huffing and puffing. I sounded like the big bad wolf about to blow down the Three Little Pigs house, and gasping for air. But I knew I should have more in the tank. But the little voice was kicking in. My authoritative voice saying, "Oh, you can't go any faster than this. You're at the end of your limit. You need to slow down." So I imagine that was Mickey Mouse after sucking on a helium balloon. You can't go any faster than this. You need to slow down. I started busting out loud laughing, and I didn't have headphones in or anything. So I'm just here running along, red-faced, sweat pouring down me, gasping for air, and all of a sudden I just break out laughing. Literally laugh out loud laughter. And this couple started, and they looked at me like I was a maniac. But it worked.
It worked.
I managed to keep going.
So that was your pattern interrupt.
That was my pattern interrupt. The moment I hear that little voice come in, that negative voice being stern and authoritative, bang, get the axe, cut the legs out from underneath them with Mickey Mouse on helium. So that's
quite interesting in and of itself.
That's a takeaway. Rip the authority out.
That is a brilliant takeaway. And that links back to what you said. Oh, what did you say? You said something earlier that I found quite interesting, and it's about, it's almost like the serious, you know, when we're in that place of, you know, not feeling great, you know. So this last year, everything is actually really serious.
Yeah.
It's all serious. Yeah. So actually having that lighter, you know, childlike, like you said earlier, and like even for that pattern interrupt, you've made yourself laugh from some funny children's voice. So it is, I mean, it's just another way of saying, man, don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
And it's all small stuff, as the book says. We take everything so seriously. When we lighten up a little bit and see things for what they really are, and then, like you say, put a little silly childish voice on the end of something to just take that seriousness out of it, lighten up the mood, that is a pattern interrupt in itself, right? Because it isn't, totally. You know, why does life have to be so serious? It doesn't.
No,
that's again a story. That's a story that we tell ourselves that, you know, now we've got to a certain age, we've got to start acting serious. Well, I never will, quite obviously.
Nor I. You know, clowning is an important aspect of what I do in terms of performance. So the chances of me being serious, I have serious moments.
Yeah, there you go. As we all will. And I think that's an important thing to state is, like, I'm not all happy and, you know, everything's wonderful 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We all have moments, all of us. But then that's all, unless we give it so much emotional attachment, that's all it will ever be. Just a moment. It's just a passing moment.
Yeah.
Our lives will be.
As you said earlier, ride the wave. It has highs, it has lows. And, you know, balance, people think balance is something that's static. It's not. It's the opposite. It's completely dynamic. Balance involves highs and lows. It involves swaying from side to side. No tightrope walker ever did well by standing in one place indefinitely on one leg.
Static.
Even when they look like they're static, they're actually shifting the pole from side to side to maintain weight. Balance is constantly moving. And in life, as well as in the circus, your balance is constantly changing, adjusting. Some days we'll have more stress. Some days we'll have less. Some days you need more physical energy. You need more calories. Some days you need less. A Netflix marathon requires substantially less eating than running a marathon. But funnily enough, you're probably going to eat more during the Netflix marathon than you are while you're running the marathon. So
there you go.
Try to find the balance in things.
Yes.
And have fun doing it. There
you go. It is having fun. There you go. So that's probably the moral of the story. The pattern interrupt has got to be fun. Just like really an otter. I mean, although it was a serious subject, the fact that it was an otter, the fact that it was an animal that you had been searching for all your life just popped up. Must have been. I mean, I'm sure you would have actually laughed in a different set of circumstance, but still having that lighter thing is all the way. So that does seem to be the moral of this story, actually. Have fun.
A long and winding story.
Have fun. There you go, because that is what it is. This whole lockdown has knocked the fun out of everything. We're not allowed to do this. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to stand up. We're not allowed to dance. We're not allowed to sing. We're not allowed to go to the cinema. We're not allowed to go to this. All the fun has been forcibly removed, or they've tried to remove it from us. Yeah. But we can still find ways, right? Mm-hmm. They can't keep us down. They can't keep us down forever. We can find our own ways of lightening the mood, even if it's just even hearing a voice in your head that sounds like Mickey Mouse.
Yeah,
sucking from a helium balloon. Or get some helium balloons yourself. That would be. Oh, I don't know what I'm recommending now. Hang on.
Yeah. That's fine for 1 or 2 breaths, but then after that, asphyxiation can be an issue. So, yes, if your lips start to turn blue, stop. Yeah.
There you go. So we've got to be careful on our recommendations. So, okay, so Malachy, explain about what you do, what your business is, how you help people personally.
Yeah. So my main area of business is coaching. So it's one-to-one coaching, and it's health for personal performance, really is the basis of what I do. And whether that's performance at work, in your personal life, whether it's you just want to lose weight that you've struggled with for a number of years, maybe you've set goals in the past that seem to be ticking the boxes. You've probably heard of SMART goal setting: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timed. It's a really good way of setting goals. It does have its limitations, though. So I generally help people with smarter goal setting by leaving logic on the shelf at first and finding the emotion behind the actual goal. What's the importance of it? Why is it significant to you? And I use the expression, find a why that brings a tear to your eye. Because when you have that, you have an emotion-driven goal. And those are the ones that actually matter to you. So often in health and fitness, I'm going to use an example of weight loss because that seems to be the initial goal that most people have, or that most clients would come in with, until they realize the number on the scale is actually the least of their concerns, and they've got a much more important personal reason behind this, an emotion-driven reason. And it normally takes a few layers of questioning to get to that. And sometimes I'll get called a variety of colorful and interesting names, normally when I'm about 4 whys deep. And right. I get again childlike in that I keep asking why, yeah. And I'm not going to be flippant about it. But if you come into me and say you want to lose 8 pounds, my answer would be why. And on the surface, it'll be, it might be because I'm going on holiday and I want to look good. Okay, why? Why is that important to you? Or it could be because I want to fit into my wedding dress. Why is that important to you? I know, obviously, on the surface, why fitting into the wedding dress is going to be important. Wedding, big, most fantastic day of your life. There's always something that little bit deeper, though. There's always something that's a really strong emotion. And when you find that really strong emotional driver, then you can really get past everything that's stopping you. Because if you have set yourself a plan where you're going to exercise 3 times a week and you've had a crappy week at work, and or the kids have been giving you hell and you're just feeling drained, and the prospect of a workout, it just makes you want to pull the pillow up over your head and just have a lie in. If you have a really strong emotion-driven why, the moment that the thought of that training session, not workout, and I'm being careful with my language, the thought of that training session mightn't still inspire you or fill you with joy, but then you will immediately think of why you're doing it. And that's the moment where your eyes mist, you throw back the duvet, you get up, you get out, you get on with it, and you get it done. And then you feel great. You don't have to. I don't love exercise. I come from a background of being heavily overweight, low self-esteem, and very much on a path to disabling myself through my poor lifestyle of poor food choices and being physically inactive. And even as a teenager, I was seeing the results of that. And it was a path, like many other things, I had a pattern interrupt. Back to the pattern interrupt.
There you go.
And it was an absolute moment of clarity. I'm done with this. This changes. And literally overnight, changed a heap of habits. And it wasn't easy, but it wasn't difficult. It wasn't rocket science. I identified a few key things that were holding me back and making me miserable. I took action on them. And as I was making progress, I could ease up a little bit
There you go.
when I needed a break. And that's the same kind of philosophy as I take with my coaching. We find what's important. We find the reason why it's important. And then we look at all the obstacles, all the things that get in your way, and we just either find ways to get around them, get over them, or find
a pattern interrupt.
A pattern interrupt, exactly. How did you think of such a fabulous thing to say?
There you go. So how can people get in? Thank you for your time today, Malachy. So
a pleasure.
The listeners, if wherever you're listening to this or watching this, you'll have all of Malachy's details. But to the listeners on Mintwave Radio, if they can't see that, how would they get in contact with you?
That would be holisticbalance.ie, and you'll know you're in the right place when you see the otter.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad. I'm so grateful to that otter. There you go.
Me too, Karen.
Very, very glad that you had that pattern interrupt and that you can share your story with other people to hopefully become that pattern interrupt for them. So thank you very much for the time. To all the listeners, I will be back next Monday at 2 p.m. for a Coffee with Karen. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Welcome to the Coffee with Karen podcast, a weekly chat show discussing everything from holistic health to current affairs from a mental, physical and spiritual perspective. Get your weekly cup of positivity with a sprinkling of woo-woo.